everyone, and welcome to my channel. My name is Barbara and this is Barbara Talks Some More. So if you are here for the first time, welcome to this channel. It's actually my second channel. My original channel is called Barbara Talks, so be sure to subscribe over there because over there I go way more in depth on so many different things in the astrology world and metaphysical world. I also like to go live over there. Be sure to check out my playlists over there on that page because everything is organized into playlists, so you guys can kind of see what you're interested in learning about and then select the playlist, and then you should find your placement there. Okay, I also have Synastry videos too. Now, that being said, if you guys would like your own natal chart reading, Synastry reading, progressed natal chart reading, mini natal chart reading, or mini Synastry reading, you guys could always send me an email. Okay, so you go on my website, it's going to be in the description box below. You select which reading you guys would like under the readings tab, and then when you select the reading you guys would like, an email window should pop up. Okay, so when the email window pops up, send me an email and then we will go from there. Okay, so be sure to check that out if you would like your own reading. My readings are pretty much in the similar format to these ones that I do over here. Okay, it's a video, but it's me talking the entire time. And also the video that I do today and pretty much all of these videos on this page here are closer to my mini natal chart and mini Synastry readings, okay, where I kind of go over the general overview, whatever jumps out at me, okay. When I pull up the chart, when I do the in-depth readings, I go over absolutely everything, okay. You guys can, of course, always ask questions if you have any specific thing you guys would like me to focus on, okay? So that's pretty much that. And then also, I always gotta let you guys know, okay, everything that comes through in these readings over here is alleged, okay? It's for educational purposes only. Obviously, I do not know these people. I'm just going based off of the charts and whatever I'm hooking into energetically as a hook into the energies here, okay? Now, that being said as well, I'm not channeling anybody, okay? These are not messages from the beyond. We are just looking at the natal charts here to see what is the synastry between these two individuals. Today, we're going to be looking at Michael Jackson and Joe Jackson, okay? I was very, very curious to see what is the synastry between these two individuals. Now, with that being said as well, if you have this taking place either in your own chart or, in synastry with another person, it doesn't always have to play out this way, okay? So, keep that in mind. There's always a light side and a shadow side to all of the manifestations of the energies. And it depends on the rest of the energies, the rest of the aspects. There's so many things going on. And of course, transits, all these things, right? So it's not always going to play out the same way. But of course, patterns are patterns. So sometimes it might, So again, say with a grain of salt, you're always going to have to assess the situation and the person that you're dealing with as well to see which energy are they more leaning toward. Are they more leaning toward the divine expression or the shadow expression? Now, that being said as well, I already did a reading on Michael Jackson a few months ago. I was hooking into his energy. I felt them pulling his energy closer to the earth plane. Okay, that's something that's really challenging when people are super, super famous like this, okay, and especially when they're born into occult families, which, like I mentioned earlier, obviously, again, everything's alleged in these readings. These are just my own speculations and theories and thoughts as well, right? But I'm pretty sure, that Michael Jackson was born into an occult family, okay? It's interesting. When I did the reading a few months ago, I did not know nearly as much information as I do now. I went to go watch the movie, okay, and since then, I've had a bunch of things popping up on my feed, both Joe Jackson and Michael Jackson are related as well. So now I have more information as well, which is so interesting though, because when I did do the reading a few months back, the energies that I was hooking into, played out to be pretty accurate, okay, in terms of Michael Jackson and his upbringing. I did mention the father there as well. And then not only that, but the fact that they were pulling his energy closer to the earth plane. And of course, we had the movie come out. Now, here's the thing too, what I started saying as well earlier is the challenge with people who are this ultra famous, ultra known, is that a lot of people connect to their energy, right? And because so many people are connecting to their energy, these people don't fully exit the earth plane, right? So that's one of the deals, when they talk about signing certain deals with certain groups, right? That's part of the deal, is that you don't fully exit this earth plane, right? You're kind of lingering around, okay, the earth plane, and then the whole reason you don't fully exit this whole reincarnation loop and all these things is because so many people are connecting to your energy. So every time someone thinks of you, every time someone listens to your song, your energy is being pulled in closer into this earth plane. And of course, they pulled his energy in to do the movie. Of course, more siphoning had to take place. This is someone who was fully energetically siphoned his entire life. It's interesting. There's a few things that are going on here that I probably didn't mention in the other reading that I did that I've hooked into since then. First of all, what I've noticed with him, okay, Michael Jackson, is that because he was born into this occult family, and I even have more speculations now compared to that reading as well earlier when I talked about his family being probably already involved in these things. Now I think there's even more actually compared to before, because of the fact that it's very obvious to me that they put him on his quote unquote Saturn path and his Saturn trajectory. That's actually what I learned through Michael Jackson. But the other thing also that I found out now from, you know, seeing these videos and so on and so forth, is that the two parents here, okay, again, allegedly, this is a video that I saw, so again, you know, you guys can take it with a grain of salt, but, you know, there was a storyline that was floating around that apparently Joe Jackson wanted to be a musician himself, and same with Catherine, like that they were, you know, involved in this, that apparently that she got pregnant, and that kind of derailed their path. So again, you know, that's just something that I saw on my feed. But, you know, it would kind of make sense as to why he had all this bitterness toward his children, first of all, but second of all, why he pushed the kids into the entertainment industry as well. Because what parents do a lot of the time, what I've noticed, is that they tend to, you know, either try to heal themselves through their children, whether they're aware of it or not, or they also try to live vicariously through their children, certain things that maybe they weren't able to achieve by pushing their children into a certain direction, right? That's usually what happens with parenting. I've noticed in general, people tend to do is, you know, whatever their upbringing was like, they either tend to go in the complete opposite direction of that. It's all like trauma-based stuff, really, to like, you know, give the child a complete opposite experience, for example, right, compared to what they had. Or again, you know, things like unfulfilled dreams, things that they never had, they tend to project that onto the children. So, you know, a lot of the time the children might not even be on their own path. Now, that being said as well, okay, you know, trigger warning in this video, I might mention abuse and physical abuse and all these things. So again, you know, if you're not aware of that already when it comes to Michael Jackson and Joe Jackson, definitely click off now if it is a sensitive topic for you. Now, that being said, okay, getting into the reading here, you know, a few interesting things. Already I've been hooking into a bunch of things over here, but I'll give you guys their birth information here. So Michael Jackson was born August 29th, 1958, 7:33 p.m. Okay. Gary, Indiana. Now, here's the thing. Here is the thing. In my previous reading that I did on him, I was kind of hooking more into him either being a Leo rising or a Virgo rising. Okay. So in this, you know, combination here, he is a Pisces rising. Now, here's what I'm going to say. Okay. Again, these people are heavily involved in the occult. Okay. They already know that. They know these things, especially if they come from families that are heavily involved in the occult as well. Okay. Again, of course, allegedly, got to say that, right? But with that being said, always have to take their birth information with a grain of salt, okay? You know, more so intuitively. It's so interesting. I remember when I was doing that reading a few months ago, I kept putting him as 7:33 a.m., okay? It was so interesting to me, just like, you know, by accident when I was looking up his chart. And, you know, I'm pretty sure now I didn't put it now. I'm going to go based off of what we have, okay, for just the sake of today's reading. Again, my speculations, right? I found that interesting. And like I mentioned, I kind of felt like he would either have been a Leo rising or a Virgo rising, like a double Virgo, maybe with the sun in the 12th house, or if he was maybe a Leo rising, he could have had maybe the Mercury and the Venus even in the 12th house. Basically, the chart would have been flipped, which would have made a lot of sense to me. I got a lot of 12th house energy from him. Like, to me, he's very Uranian. That's going to be his Mercury conjunct Uranus, which, by the way, you guys, I personally look up to 10 degrees of an orb. If it catches my attention, I will open it up to 15. Okay, so I'm definitely more lenient with the orbs. I know some people are hardcore and they only look at like the super tight orbs and they don't count anything outside of that. But, you know, when I feel the energy in the person, and this is literally what I was telling you guys on my live today, I feel the energy first and then I'm actually looking for it in the chart as well. Okay, so he's very Uranian to me, even Neptunian, okay? Outside of this world. That's why I titled that video Out of Bounds. Always felt very uncomfortable. He felt uncomfortable in his skin, okay? Even the Venus conjunct Uranus, you know, awkwardness when it came to his relationships, right? Awkward when it came to women. You know, again, I don't know him, but that's kind of like the vibe that I get. If anything, honestly, like I get more of an asexual energy from him. I do feel like, this is all Michael Jackson, by the way. I do feel like he kind of channeled a lot of his sexual energy into his dancing. He also, to me, is someone who was very much able to hold energy, like people's energy is really what it is. So I do think that that's part of the reason he was so successful. Again, you know, check out that first video where I went even more in depth, you know, when it came to his energy. Okay, in today's video, I'm going to try to give you guys new information, not repeating too many things that I've already mentioned. But, you know, some of this context is important in terms of his dynamic with Joe Jackson. So let me give you guys Joe Jackson's birth information here. Joe Jackson's born, again, you know, we're taking this with a grain of salt, right? It's on the internet. You don't know if it's accurate or not, but we'll go based off of this, okay? Joe Jackson, born on July 26, 1928. Here it says he's born in Fountain Hill, Arkansas, in the United States. He is a double 8, 8 day number, 8 life path. Somebody who was literally meant to master money in this lifetime, okay? He is somebody who was probably obsessed with money. I mean, again, if you guys watched the movie, you probably saw that, right? You know, that's all he cared about, money, 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 right? I think he was not able to do it on his own, okay, which is very obvious, and then he kind of pushed his children into that direction. Now, what's interesting between the dynamic between him and Michael is, okay, Michael is a 29, okay? He's born on the 29th. These people usually, and this is just from my own observation, so whether you're 29, okay, whether you're an 11 day number, so this is a day number, or a life path, okay, this is one of those master numbers, these individuals always have influence. Like, this is someone who is always going to have some sort of influence in their life, especially if they are able to harness their energy. Okay, when the energy goes into the shadow of the energy, you know, they tend to go toward a lot of negativity, right? Is really what it is. Because again, a lot of quote unquote negative events that have happened in the world were always on 11-day numbers as well. Okay, so keep this in mind. But when the person is able to come into their power, you know, really pull their power back to themselves, this is someone who's able to not only be very influential, but also, you know, they have the ability to harness the energy of other people. And that's just one of my beliefs as to why Michael Jackson was put into the place that he was put into, okay, because of his ability to harness the energy of other people. So that's one of the main things why he was able to kind of get to the level that he was able to get to. Now, the other interesting thing here is there's an interesting dynamic going on between these two individuals as I hook into their energies. Now, of course, there was a lot of abuse taking place. When it comes to Joe Jackson, as I hook into his energy and as I've looked at his natal chart as well, he's got a moon in Scorpio, okay? This could potentially be, again, this isn't going to be for every single moon in Scorpio out there, okay? This is just something that can happen, okay, for Scorpio energy in a chart, especially moon in Scorpio. He's got a moon in Scorpio, so there could have definitely been some form of sexual abuse early on in life, okay, for him. I do pick up on that in his energy field, and to further confirm that, okay, depends what time he was born at, okay? Because, again, you know, if he was born all the way toward the end of the day here, he could have been a Sag moon. I don't think he's a Sag moon. He's definitely a Scorpio moon, okay? And, you know, shadow Scorpio is his whole vibe, okay? Like, when someone is in the shadow of the Scorpio energy, again, very controlling, domineering, you know, absolutely can be aggressive, right? Scorpio, you know, ruled by Mars, okay? In ancient astrology can be aggressive. But not only that, okay, so he's got that going on. He's got Lilith, okay, conjunct his moon. We don't have his time of birth, so we don't have a rising sign here. And then we also don't have the houses for him, which is fine, okay? But, you know, we're just going to look at this kind of like generally at first glance. Lilith conjunct the moon. Here is a lot of darkness connected to the home, connected to the upbringing. I personally think that he was sexually abused as a young child himself, which then he, you know, passed on to his children. Again, you know, these are just things that I have hooked into. You know, some of the siblings have come out and said certain things, you know, and to further confirm the sexual abuse for him, Mars square Neptune, okay? Mars square Neptune can absolutely manifest into some form of sexual abuse when this person was growing up. Now, with that being said, you know, if you just have Mars square Neptune, it doesn't always have to play out that way, but, you know, in combination with the moon in Scorpio, in combination with the moon and Lilith, right, together here. And also, look at this. He's got moon Pluto, moon trine Pluto, okay? It is, you know, a trine. So usually this is more of a harmonious energy, but at the end of the day, you guys, Pluto is Pluto. Okay, so Pluto is Pluto. So it's like Pluto's still going to bring these Plutonian themes to his emotional world, to his home, to his upbringing, okay? Now, the other thing was interesting with Joe Jackson as well, and part of some stories here connected to the Jackson family, is one of the siblings here, okay? Now, because there's so many of them, I can't remember the exact person. You guys are going to have to do your research to see. But basically, there was a storyline going around, okay, again, in these videos that I saw, okay, over this past little while since I watched the movie. There was a storyline going around, and again, this is alleged, but again, it popped up on my feed. A storyline going around that he actually had a kid. So one of the kids in the Jackson family was a product of incest from another one of the kids. Now, I can't remember who it was. I'm thinking of someone in my mind, but I don't want to give wrong information. So you guys can definitely look that up and see if there's any other information about that online. But it's interesting because for him, okay, Joe Jackson himself, I actually think, allegedly, one more time, I think he may have actually been a product of incest himself. Okay, he just gives me that vibe. Okay, again, you know, obviously can't confirm this. It's not something I'm seeing in the chart. It's more so psychically, intuitively, as I hook into the energy. I feel like he was a product of incest himself. I think, you know, again, this is intergenerational stuff here, okay, that we're talking about. Okay, this is a certain type of family that's been involved in this, like, again, incestuous, you know, stuff, but also sexual abuse type of stuff. I do think that this is something that, you know, was potentially taking place and could have taken place as well. Okay, for him, okay, it could have been, you know, some woman family member, moon in Scorpio, right? Could be a female, a woman, Pluto trine the moon, and then the Lilith in here. It's really the Lilith here in Scorpio that's throwing all of this over the edge. Is really what it is. So that's the other thing that I hooked into. Okay, that's more so psychically. Now, the other thing also, what I noticed here in his chart, this is Joe Jackson now, is the Mercury in Cancer. Okay, conjunct Pluto as well. This is why family was so important to him, right? This is why, he always tried to push that whole theme, quote unquote, of family. And, if you guys watch the movie also, and I know in the movie, it's obviously, not going to be exactly what he said, maybe, right? It is a biopic at the end of the day. And, it's not a documentary, right? But of course, anytime anyone creates a movie, there's always going to have to be a villain in the movie, and they're going to play that up, right? But with that being said, there's a theme here of family being important. And you could see that too in Michael Jackson in his everyday life interviews, right? Where he would talk about how his family is important to him. So it does seem like that really did get drilled, okay, into MJ's brain, and that comes from the dad, okay? So that's what's going on here. Now, the other thing that I'm picking up on for Joe Jackson is this Saturn retrograde, okay? It is in Sag, but the Saturn being retrograde usually does symbolize an absence of a father figure early on in life. Could have been mental, emotional, or physical. But what I'm getting more so for him, interestingly enough, is that the father was very, very strict. I'm getting this energy. The sun does trine the Saturn, okay? So, he could have been maybe absent in different ways, or maybe the mother remarried and had another masculine figure around. I do get a very strict paternal figure around him as well. Now, his son is in Leo. This is someone who always wanted to be seen. The other thing that's important to understand, okay, and you guys will see this now as a pattern as, I go through some of these, individuals when I talk about their synastry, right? Selena being another one. I should actually look at the synastry between her and that demon. But, I did mention it in passing probably in that video as well, okay? You guys will start to see usually someone who has a lot of light energy. And, for those of you maybe who resonate with being maybe like quote unquote empaths, I know that word is butchered on the internet these days, but, higher vibrational beings, people who are pure, again, sensitive people, highly sensitive people, right? Someone who has a lot of light. You guys have to be very, very weary, okay? Because people who are not in their power, okay, who have had their power taken away from them, whether they're narcissistic, first of all, these people tend to be vessels for dark energy, okay, and demons. So that's the first thing, right? Not to take their power away from them. Everybody needs to heal whatever took place in their lives, right? So they don't end up being a vessel for these things. But, most people are unaware. So we need to be realistic down here on this airplane. Most people are operating out of their unconscious programming. So what happens is because these people, in this case, it's going to be Joe, right? Because they feel so powerless, maybe they weren't able to achieve their own goals in life, right? Their own dreams, all these things. What they do, and, similar to the Yolanda situation, Selena, and so many more examples of this that have taken place, right? Is that what they do is they try to energetically latch on to the light being, okay? So they get recognized still, right? But they get recognized by secondhand through the light being is really what it is. Because now, Michael was in the spotlight. Of course, he was a huge star and all these things. But again, you can't talk about Michael without talking about Joe and the family, right? So he's still getting, again, Sun in Leo, that recognition, right? That he was probably so craving, but felt powerless to achieve on his own, okay? So that's the other thing that I picked up on. Now, let's look at their synastry here. The main thing that I really wanted to talk about, and this is exactly what I was looking for, is Pluto and Mars. I was looking to see what is it that brings upon this intense abuse between these two individuals. Here we have it. Pluto square Mars. It's Michael's Pluto squaring Joe's Mars. Usually the Mars person in these Pluto Mars, and it's usually the square. It is 10 degrees, right? So again, the hardcore people are, maybe not going to count this. I look up to 10, sometimes even further, okay, if I'm feeling the energy. But it's usually any sort of Pluto Mars, okay, is going to kind of bring some form of aggression, because what happens with Pluto Mars is that the Pluto person tends to behave in ways unconsciously, okay, without even realizing that trigger the Mars person. And because Mars, okay, ruled by Aries, is such an energy that is impulsive, it's very reactive, right? It's usually the Mars person and the Pluto Mars dynamics that plays out the aggression, okay? Because again, Mars is ruled by Aries, okay? It's a little bit more, again, the earlier sign, immature, not a lot of processing, emotional processing that's happening here. So again, this is very, very subtle and unconscious energies that tend to take place. Again, if people are unhealed here, and again, if they're unaware, right? And these Plutonian synastries, this is one of the manifestations, right? Not always, but it's definitely something to watch out for. And if you guys are ever getting involved in one of these synastries, right, whether it's romantic or friends or whatever, it's like, again, you have to assess and see how evolved is the other person. Now, in this case, obviously, this was his child, right? So obviously, someone who's born, they are behaving in ways unconsciously that are triggering the other individual. Now, Pluto Mars synastry will also bring upon a lot of jealousy, okay? It's going to bring upon a lot of possessiveness. It's like Mars feels powerless to Pluto is really, really what it is. Okay, so they try to exert their power on the Pluto person, right? So that's what's happening here, okay? And the other thing that I found really interesting between the two of them, again, let's say that, you know, MJ's time of birth is accurate, right? Let's say he actually was born in the evening, you know, whatever. In this case, Joe's Mars goes into his second house. Okay, this is another one of the synastries to watch out for. This brings upon a very similar energy. This is when you see someone's worth, because it's going into the second house, okay? You see the worth within this person, you see the value within them, but it's Mars. Mars wants to break it down, okay? Mars might want to tear it apart, okay? So Mars in the second house, sometimes even Pluto in the second house. These are synastries to watch out for, okay? Again, you know, it won't play out like this always, okay? But there's always an element with second house synastry of putting the person on a pedestal, but then also being jealous, okay? That, you know, they're on the pedestal, or like, because the second house deals with the material plane, Mars in the second house synastry, it's like the Mars person feels like they are dependent on the second house person in one way, shape, or form. Like, let's say to get the money in this case, right? It's usually material things, like it's connected to material things. So this is Mars in the second house, right? So there's the element of jealousy here, you know, seeing a lot of value in the person, but also at the same time wanting to be them. You know what I mean? Seeing a lot of value in the person, same time wanting to tear them down. Mars is aggression, okay? So it's interesting that this is taking place again if the time of birth is accurate. Now, here's where things get interesting, okay? Moon in the 8th house synastry. Not only that, they have Moon trine Moon, okay, taking place here. Again, yes, it's going to depend on the time of birth, right, for Joe to see exactly, you know, the degrees of his Scorpio moon. But still, it would be a trine because MJ's moon, Pisces, 14 degrees, and then Joe's moon, okay, the earliest degrees are going to be 20, all the way up to 29, right? So again, that's still within 15 degrees of an orb, depending what time Joe was born. This is really, really interesting to me because despite everything, okay, you know, Michael still had some form of empathy, first of all, towards Joe, but also the whole reason, you know, these two in one way, shape, or form vibe, like the whole reason Michael became kind of like the main player, you know, in the Jackson 5 and all these things, like, yes, he possessed the light, like that's all there, but he was able to hook into, okay, what Joe had kind of like as a vision, okay, is really what it is, more so on that emotional level. Like they did have some form of like, this is like a spiritual connection in one way, shape, or form. Like he was able to hook into that. Now, this is why I further believe, okay, that, you know, Michael, MJ, was a 12 houser because he really played into the projections that people had onto him, right? So with that being said, if he was a 12 houser, the rising sign here would have been either Leo or Virgo. He would have had 12 house placements taking place, okay? But, you know, more than anything, I always hooked into 12 house sun for him. For some reason, I always picked up on that for him because he always continued to even be the scapegoat is really what it is. And look at this, Pluto in the 12th house. I'm going to make a video on that because this is something that I've been really hooking into recently. Pluto in the 12th house, people or Scorpio occupying the 12th house, they tend to become scapegoats, okay? And look, if he, let's say, was a Virgo rising, for example, okay, maybe double Virgo, let's say the 12th house was occupied by Virgo and he was a Virgo rising, for example, his sun would have gone into the 12th, Pluto would have gone into the 12th, okay? And it's just like, also 12 housers tend to be shy, okay? Because you know how MJ kind of has like that pure vibe to him, kind of like shy, and like the awkwardness is the Uranus within him, but like the shyness a little bit, you know, like almost very humble, like cutesy vibe. To me, that's very 12th house. And if his sun was in the 12th house, okay, you know, sun in Virgo, I talked about this in the previous video, that means the father would have been very critical. This is why MJ was a perfectionist, right? And again, you know, if he didn't perform accurately, he would have been basically abused by the father. Okay, so, you know, that tracks, the sun being in Virgo. So I do think, you know, he probably was a sun in Virgo. But the sun being in the 12th is really interesting to me because this indicates to me more so that the dynamic with the father is basically karmic from a previous lifetime. It's basically this person, sun in the 12th, usually the father, okay? Again, if it's not the father, dominant masculine role in your life, and then masculines in your life, you know, they're being carried over into this lifetime as a past life enemy is really, really what it is, okay, which the father ultimately was. Now, the huge plus here in this whole dynamic was he was able to free himself from the father, okay, is really, really what it is, okay, and still go off and do his own thing and not be, you know, fully under his grasp, okay, but there's still unfinished business here, and I'm pretty sure I talked about that more so energetically when I hook into the vibes. Talked about that in the previous video as well. It's such an interesting dynamic, okay, you know, I'm pretty sure also while I had all those videos popping up on my feed that there was something where he kind of was, this is Michael, where he was exhibiting some form of compassion towards the father, and that's so Pisces moon, like when you have a Pisces moon, like this is, they say, right, in astrology, that this is the final step of like the evolutionary journey, especially when it comes to the emotional world here, right? So usually this is someone who's very evolved, especially emotionally, right? So I just find it interesting that he still had, you know, compassion towards the father. But energetically, when I hook into this, there is still definitely like unfinished business between the two of them. Now, what's interesting to me also at the same time is when I was looking at the synastry between the two of them is that there's a lot of Neptune, okay? There's a lot of Neptune synastry here. Like, look, MJ's sun conjuncts the Neptune of the father. So MJ kind of probably felt like, again, I don't know, these people just, you know, based off the synastry, that, you know, he was never seen for who he truly was by the father. Even his Neptune squares the father's sun, okay? There's a lot of like blurry lines here, you know, of course, blurry boundaries, all these things. Look at this. The Neptune of the father conjuncts MJ's Mercury. The Neptune of the father squares the Mars of MJ. Here's the potential, you know, alleged sexual abuse. Now, the Neptune and Mercury is interesting because here it is again, like MJ being hooked into the unconscious of the father, you know, speaking these things into existence for him, you know, and I think that that's why the father had hooked into MJ's energy field so strongly, because it's like he was kind of like almost his unconscious, like the father's unconscious, Joe's, okay, you know, his dreams, you know, his visions, like all these things personified is really what it is. But it's like at the same time, there's like the resentment from the father's side that he wouldn't be able to do this. Now, the other thing was interesting to me too is there's a lot of Jupiter synastry. That's something that I look for when I look at synastry charts as well, to see is there like a theme of planets here. There's a lot of Jupiter from MJ's side, okay? There's some also from the father's side, okay? There's also some going on from the father's side too, absolutely, okay? Like for example, Venus squares Jupiter. So it's the father's Jupiter, Joe's Jupiter, squaring the Venus of MJ, right? Which is interesting because this is like literally like blowing up his finances. But like I'm also getting like, because it's a square, I'm kind of also picking up on blowing up MJ's insecurities too, because Venus can deal with like the aesthetics and the visual and all these things. That's kind of what I'm picking up on here. But kind of what I was trying to get at with all the Jupiter from MJ's side and also the Neptune, I do feel like MJ incarnating into this family, like basically being, you know, Joe's son, he was actually meant to help Joe ascend and evolve and transcend through this energy, is really what it is. And it's so interesting to me because it's like there was an interview that popped up on my feed where someone was asking Joe about how he felt because MJ did not include him in the will, and you could actually see that he was like hurt by this. Okay, he obviously didn't say it, and again, you have to be a little bit more intuitive to hook into the energy here, right? But he definitely was very hurt by this because that was kind of like, you know, MJ's final in one way, shape, or form, again, whether it's conscious or unconscious, you know, basically being like F you, right, to him for how he treated him. Okay, so I found that really, really interesting. So because he had that little moment of you know, like being upset by this and so on and so forth, like that could have been like the little sliver of him, you know, expanding, which is what he was meant to do in this dynamic. But again, because there's a lot of unresolved energies here between the two of them, like feelings, okay, you know, these two are going to reincarnate again, okay, to finish whatever the story is here. Now, the other thing that I wanted to tell you guys that I found really, really interesting is MJ's moon, okay, in Pisces, trines Joe's Pluto in Cancer. And I find this really, really interesting because not only does Joe have, you know, a moon to Pluto trine in his own chart, okay, it's like with this trine taking place here, it's like Pluto, he's like obsessed, okay? It's usually the Pluto person who becomes obsessed over the moon person. They always want to have the person around, okay? Because it's like they kind of feel like the moon person understands them in a way that maybe other people don't. And I think in this case, because Joe was such an opportunist, you know, MJ was able to understand the creative vision, or like, you know, intuitively, like he was able to understand where Joe wanted to take the business, which is like in these Pluto dynamics, you know, it's very hard to separate from the Pluto person, okay, for, you know, either the planet person or in general to separate from the individual. And that's why sometimes even the separation from them, okay, can be dangerous if the Pluto person is underdeveloped or unhealed, okay, something to really, really watch out for, okay. But ultimately he did separate, like he still got to do, this is MJ, he still got to do his own creative thing, right? But the dynamic between the two of them was never fully healed because, again, Joe was either too much in his ego or just like super unhealed or whatever, okay? He just was not involved enough, okay? So again, these two will incarnate together again to resolve the story. Now, the other thing that I noticed here too is there are some Saturn placements, okay, from Joe's side aspecting the personal placements for Michael, okay? So, you know, Joe's Saturn squares Michael's sun, okay? Here is that restriction energy, restricting his ego, okay? You know, trying to mold him. That's what Pluto does too, okay? Trying to mold the person into, even the Mars in the second house synastry, if the time is accurate, okay? Trying to mold the person into how you think they should be, okay? And again, the domineering energy can be Saturn, cold, right? Cutthroat, especially in combination with like the other Pluto aspects, okay? So I find it so interesting because Saturn can absolutely be the parent and the stern parent. And this is like a theme, okay, that's playing out because, again, I do feel like whoever whatever was the dominant masculine role for Joe, okay, you know, he kind of just took that and is playing it out, or was playing out with Michael, okay? There is also Saturn square the moon. Joe's Saturn squares Michael's moon, restriction on Michael's emotional world. I do think that just more so psychically now as I'm looking at this, like I do feel like Joe's bothered, okay, by how sensitive Michael was, okay, how, you know, emotional he was, because again, he is moon in Scorpio at the end of the day, right? Joe, so he is feeling all these things, right? But moon in Scorpio can really in the shadow shut down, and they can fully cut themselves off from the emotional world. Pisces is unconditional love, right? It is an energy that again is just like naturally bringing this light, right? So I do think that Joe was bothered by that. Again, you know, I don't know them. This is just more so what I'm hooking into, you know, psychically here. Joe's Saturn squares MJ's ascendant in Pisces, okay? Again, restriction on the expression of the self. You know, if you watch the movie, you probably saw that being shown in the movie as well. Okay, so that's there. His Saturn trines his Venus. This is more of a positive aspect. Okay, but again, this is the longevity being added to the money. Him seeing Michael, this is all Joe Saturn, by the way. Him seeing Michael as the bank is really, really what it is. It is happening from the other side as well. Okay, so Michael's Saturn is trining Joe's Venus as well. And look at this. Okay, he had Michael during his Saturn return. They both have Saturn in Sagittarius, which is really, really interesting. Because remember what I was saying? You know, Joe's father is kind of like similar to how Joe is toward Michael. It's so interesting that that's coming up. Wow, okay, so I'm seeing that too. That's also what's going on here. Not to mention they both have Venus conjunct Venus in Synastry, and they also have Mars conjunct Mars. Okay, so this is really interesting to me. I noticed that parents tend to pass down, you know, certain aspects to their children. So there's a lot going on here where it's like, again, you know, MJ in one way, shape, or form was more of the outward expression of what Joe was not able to achieve, because they share a lot of these energies together. Okay, is really, really what it is. So it's interesting to see, and it's also unfortunate when you see something like this, because it's like, because of Joe's unhealed things, right? He was never able to fully accept Michael, okay? Instead, you know, he saw him as a bank, you know, to, again, soothe his own wound, his own money wounds, okay, that he wasn't able to achieve on his own. But then at the same time, because there's a dependency, and this is the shadow of Pluto energy, okay? Because the dependency is there, the person subconsciously starts to resent the other person, okay? So it's such an interesting dynamic, okay? It's really, really interesting. Now, a few more things here that I noticed that I also wanted to mention is all this Lilith, okay? So from Joe's side, Lilith, okay? His Lilith squares MJ's sun, okay? His Lilith trines MJ's moon. It squares MJ's Mercury, and then it also squares MJ's Venus, okay? So it's so interesting how people intuitively pick up on these things, okay? Because let's say MJ did stay in this dynamic and like under, you know, like the power of the father, like under his like thumb or whatever, however you say it, it's like he would have eventually lost his finances. Venus square Lilith in Synastry, okay? This is something to watch out for, because the Lilith person, okay, is usually very ruthless toward the personal planet person, and then the personal planet person gets really affected, okay, by the other individual, is really, really what it is. And, you know, look at this, the Lilith square the sun from Joe, right? Again, him being like ruthless toward, you know, MJ's ego, or just like really affecting his identity, or like saying mean things to him. Even the Mercury here, right? Lilith square the Mercury is really what it is, trying to suppress his voice, okay? Even the trine, you know, it is a trine, a little bit more subtle, right? You know, let's try the moon, but still, like, you know, the way it's playing out in this dynamic between the two of these individuals, it's like Joe was very like ruthless and heartless, you know, toward MJ is really, really what it is. And then, you know, from MJ's side, he's got his Lilith squaring Joe's Mercury, and then he's got his Lilith trining Joe's Venus, okay? But, you know, I don't really see this having played into fruition here, because it's like, okay, it's so interesting how people are and how these things play out, because it's almost like out of Joe's survival, you know, scarcity mindset of like fearing Michael, okay, that he would do this to him, to Joe, right? You know, he did it to Michael first. Like, I see that happen sometimes with people too. It's such an interesting subconscious thing that people do, where it's like, that's sometimes where the fear comes from, is really what it is. They fear that, you know, the other person will do it to them, so they do it to the other person first, is really what it is. So I don't really see this having played out from Michael's side at all, because he was in so much fear toward the father, okay? But ultimately, I mean, the light does win in the end, but, you know, there's still a lot of issues. You know, it's so interesting. Maybe I said this in the previous reading as well. Back in the day, I used to think that, you know, if you master the material plane, it would be like your final lifetime, and, you know, you would have mastered this material plane and that's it. But there's like still a lot of issues here between these two individuals, and like this energetic binding that has taken place too, where it's like, I just psychically more so feel like, again, these two will reincarnate at some point in time, okay, for the energy to be healed between the two of them, okay? Because there's still a lot of like unspoken things, okay? And just like, you know, softening really that the father here, you know, Joe had to do and master, right, in this dynamic between the two of them that he did not achieve in this lifetime is really what it is. It's more so on his side. I feel on MJ's side, like to a certain extent, he did forgive, okay? It's that mood in Pisces, it's very forgiving. But at the same time, you know, for him, the kind of link that's pulling, you know, these two people together is like him wanting to have had this like father figure that was loving, okay? And that was, you know, accepting in this way. Basically someone who maybe wasn't so harsh is kind of what I'm getting. So they'll reincarnate again, you know, maybe to try to resolve this unbalanced energy between the two of them. But that's kind of what I have for you guys here. I'm going to wrap up this reading here. I do hope you guys enjoyed my reading here on the synastry between Joe Jackson and Michael Jackson. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, you guys. And if you guys would like your own reading, you guys can send me an email. And I hope you all have a beautiful rest of the day.